Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Delivering Fast and Secure. This is a joint webinar with JFrog and Risk-Based Security, and we're going to talk about JFrog Xray and VulnDB, how they relate to each other. My name is Baruch Sadogurski. I'm the Head of Developer Relations at JFrog. This webinar is recorded. You will get the recording in a couple of days. Everybody on mute, well, because that's webinar, but we still want to hear from you. So you probably saw the link to the survey in the resources. So if you still didn't fill it up, go ahead and fill it up. We also want to hear your questions. We will going to collect the questions throughout the webinar in the Q&A panel that you can also see at the bottom, and you can bring it up and then rearrange the panels as you want them, minimize and what's not. Ask us questions. We will get to as many as possible in the end. And I think, yeah, of course, jfrog.com/xray and riskbasedsecurity.com are your resources to go and learn more and give it a try. Praise us on social, obviously. You have all the Twitter handles and the relevant hashtags in the bottom of every slide, in case you forget. With that, let's talk about people. Let's talk about you first. So we sent you a poll a couple of days ago, and you had it when you registered, actually, and also today while waiting you had another chance to fill it. And I just checked live here, the results live here on my computer. They pretty much match for what you see on the slides, so I will go from that. First of all, who are you people? The majority of you, that was 70%, now it went more like 60, but still majority of you has something to do with DevOps. I would hate saying the cursed phrase DevOps engineer, but I would say SRE, I would say maybe Ops or anything like that. Good amount, like 20%. Now our security people, welcome. I hope that will be useful for you as well, and there are others. So basically a good mix of people who care about DevSecOps, who care about security in DevOps, and this is what this webinar is about. So that's a perfect mix. Next question was, are you using open source tools at home? Very close to 100% say they did, and that makes perfect sense. This is our industry today, and no one invents everything from scratch in, every single time they need something. And third-party dependencies, open source dependencies is a reality for all of us, and this is what this webinar is about. And next question was the open source components and tools. That's kind of the same again, 100%, almost. That makes perfect sense. The next question, though, are you using security tools to scan your open source components and third party that you use? And here I think that was a very pleasant surprise for all of us, both in JFrog and in risk-based security, that a good majority of you, 70% as of a couple of hours ago, and now a little bit under 70%, actually use some kind of scanner, vulnerability scanner, as a part of your CI/CD pipeline. This is awesome. The shared goal of us here on JFrog and folks in risk-based security is bringing this number to 100%.
Or even more.
Or even more, yeah. And you can see in other questions that you can go below 100. Okay. That kind of funny question. How shift lefty are you? And I guess we might introduce this concept of shift left during our conversation. But basically what we ask is where in the process security comes in. When 0 is we don't think about it at all, and I guess 100 is each step of the way we care about security. And here, unfortunately, the numbers are are not so great. If we go by the average, we would say 45. Well, maybe it is okay. Maybe by the state of the industry now, it's actually what it is now. If we are talking about the entire process from development to all the way to distribution of your code, 50 in the middle, somewhere in the CI, maybe it would where it should be. So with this kind of a conversation starter, I think it's a good time to present the expert panel that I have the honor to interview today. We have the CISO at Risk-Based Security, Jake, with us. Hi, Jake.
Hello, how's everyone doing?
We're great. The audience is great. The results are awesome. Let's talk DevSecOps. And Ophir, Senior Product Manager at JFrog here beside me.
Hi.
Hi, welcome.
Nice to see you again.
Yeah, you didn't see me for a while.
Yeah.
And so it will be a panel. So basically, I did my talking part for today. I am satisfied, and now I will let you two have the stage, and let's dive into it. We prepared a bunch of questions for both sides to create conversation, but as a reminder, your questions are as important, so we will get to Q&A and we will be happy to hear from you as well. So the first question will be for you, Jake. Well, people might know what JFrog does, at least some part of the audience. They might not hear about risk-based security. Who are you guys? What are you doing?
Well, thanks for that. Hopefully everyone can see me broadcasting here from our Richmond, Virginia office. There we go. Hey, so really great to be here, and definitely want to show a little bit about what the company is, because you're right, not everyone may know us from the East Coast here, but I think the easiest way to think about us is we're the data company, right? And so we're the ones that, better data matters for us. And the world's most comprehensive, timely vulnerability intelligence, that's us. We're the folks that want to make sure you have the best data so that you can make the best risk decisions. And so this isn't our first rodeo. We've been around for a long time. The company was founded in 2011. We've been around, much longer than that in the security space. Believe it or not, we have 3 products, but we're really today obviously going to be focusing on the VulnDB product, which again is that core vulnerability intelligence. Now, I did at some point want to talk a little bit about sort of problem statements and all those sorts of things. So I don't know if you guys want to do that now, or if that's coming a little bit later.
I think we have a slide for that, so that will be
sounds good.
Yeah, that will be perfect. That's kind of a great intro. So as we saw more of security people come in, I expect those will be the folks who are familiar with risk-based security and maybe VulnDB, and might know less about JFrog. So Ophir?
Yeah.
What are JFrog?
So JFrog, in a nutshell, we were founded a little bit more than 10 years ago. Today we have around 5,000 customers with 400 employees around the world in seven different countries and 9 different locations. A little bit of our philosophy: we are an end-to-end platform for the whole CI/CD life cycle from development to release. We are universal. We are managing all of the different types of packages of binaries that you are creating in your organizations. Security, we are going to talk much more about that today. We are running on all environments, from on-prem to the cloud, SaaS, all different types of deployments, and we are integrated, meaning that we are helping the DevSecOps team to automate everything and to have everything supported by an API, a CLI, and whatever. And here in the next slide, we won't go into the depth of everything, but you can see Artifactory in the heart of our platform, managing all of the binaries. X-Ray is responsible for security and compliance, as we will speak about that. Distribution and bin tray for distributing the binaries, and REST and CLI APIs to help you automate and have everything programmatically supported in your environment. And you can see this slide just to get the effect of the amount of integrations that we have.
Yeah, and it's basically an interesting diagram, and if anyone is interested in how everything works together, let me know, and maybe it will be easier to get through it in a different format, because it will take us half of the webinar going through that now, so we won't do it now. Well, what I wanted to talk about instead is actually DevSecOps, right? I mentioned it in your results of the survey, and this is why we are here. This is why JFrog does what it does, and I wanted to start with you, Jake, and ask what is DevSecOps?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's one of those things where I think, if we step back and we just sort of think about DevOps and how do we get there, what was that? I think it really was trying to bring development and operations closer, right? Make things better, make things easier, reduce some of the silos so you didn't have developers versus ops and it worked on this side and now it works, doesn't work when it tries to go to production, right? So, you started to see that DevOps sort of principles coming up, trying to bring things closer, right? More automation, more testing, make things a lot better. And I'm happy there's a lot of security folks on the call today. Hey, to all the security people that joined, I think that's great. We like to think that everyone knows security is important. Security people want security things to be part of everything. And so in some ways, the DevSecOps aspect for me, it's nice that, we threw in sec in there, right, in the middle between those two, trying to say that it's built in, not bolted on after the fact. But for the most part, I think developers still don't really like security people. I think we're trying to get along. We don't want to be those people that show up and say, no, you can't do that, or you're writing crappy code or anything like that, right? So I think, now we're moving to this aspect where security is important to the whole thing, right? From the beginning, understanding those requirements, hopefully more automation of security testing, which is some stuff we'll be talking about, of course, and then through that whole sort of life cycle. So I'm happy that we're calling it DevSecOps. I'm sure some DevOps people are probably annoyed by it, saying it should just be DevOps, and it was painfully obvious that security was there. But I think the whole goal is to reduce these silos, right? We want to make sure that we're working on this stuff together, that everyone's looking at that same dashboard, those same metrics, and so we don't get into this state where developers are seeing one thing, they think things are fine, operations people are starting to agree, and the security people swoop in at the end and go, no, everything's horrible, you can't do that, right? And if we're going to move at the speed that we keep talking about, and one of the things we love about JFrog, moving at that liquid software speed, right? Doing things fast. We can't be fast unless it's secure. We know how important that is. So I think that from my perspective as a security guy, I'm happy to see this, and hopefully, the development side is as well. Yeah,
I for one completely agree with you. I think that although we all have to admit that security was an afterthought for the DevOps movement, and we really kind of start without you, the security guys. Now we realize that that's another silo that need to be torn down, and there is no way around it. Security aspects are critical, and especially with everything that we know is going on, starting with Equifax, that now you can get your $125 and all the way to Capital One from yesterday. Mm-hmm. We understand that security is an issue. And as we decided that the best way to tackle issues is building a common culture and we work together and solve the problem together. The same goes for security as well, and it has to be a part of DextraFox.
Right.
So, what do you think about it?
Yeah, so just a little bit about my background, and I think that it will connect. In my far past, I was a developer. I managed teams of developers in different companies, cybersecurity companies as well. And at some point with the security, the customers of ours were usually non-developers. And as the usage of open source just increases, and we know that 60 to 80% of the code base today is open source. And we've seen just your proof to that in the poll at the beginning of this session. It is simply a huge amount of data or a huge amount of usage that brings with him a big amount of vulnerabilities or potential vulnerabilities. And so as Jake was saying, if in the past we've seen the shift, the mindset move from dev and ops to DevOps, today we see security that they must join into the party. It's not an option, because with the amount of vulnerabilities identified, a security team cannot handle this much usage. And developers need to add open source on a daily basis. It's not something that is being added once in 6 months or something like that. It's being added on a daily basis, and the security guys need to decide whether to approve a certain library or not. And without the knowledge of the developers, no one can really understand and decide how to mitigate a vulnerability. And so it should be combined together. Otherwise, you're stuck at the day of the release with a binary that contains a vulnerability, and now how can you stop the release? It's simply impossible. And with all of this shift left movement, with breaking the silos, if we can help you customers identify vulnerabilities as soon as possible, we can make the release much faster and much secure, and we can save both time and money with that.
Yeah, so, we, as JFrog, actually made the move to tackle this problem, and that was the partnership with Risk-Based Security that we announced earlier this year. Actually, I think the big announcement was SwampUp, our user conference in June, just a month ago. What does it mean? Why did we do it? What was the rationale behind it?
Right. So I love what Donald Rumsfeld said in the past, and I'll read it with your permission. There are no knowns. These are things we know that we know. There are known unknowns. That is to say, there are things that we know we don't know, but there are also unknown unknowns. There are things we don't know we don't know. And this is the big problem. Equifax did not know that they have a ticking bomb. And so we can, at JFrog, develop a very good scanner. We can have a lot of features, but without a good vulnerabilities database, it's worth nothing. And when we came to understand that, we looked for the best vulnerabilities source, and the natural choice was to go with VulnDB from RBS. And we hope that Risk-Based Security also is as excited about this partnership, and as we are. How do you see this partnership, Jake?
Yeah, no, we're extremely happy to partner with JFrog. At the end of the day, when we first started the company, again, our principles were just about data, right? Having the best data. And what we learned is that dumping a big pile of data on people that are already overloaded with work and are trying to do all these other things, it's tough, right? And so, our mantra is still the same, right? Better data matters. But to help our customers really get the maturity that they want to, it's more than just throwing this intelligence at them, right? And so we have a lot of customers that are extremely happy about this partnership, because now you've got sort of the whole life cycle, right? It's from the identification of these components and libraries, figuring out where the vulnerabilities are, and then through that whole life cycle, integrate it. That's that's the way we get better at this stuff, right? And in some ways, we've been tracking vulnerabilities for so long, it's like we're not getting any better, right? I mean, the number of vulnerabilities isn't decreasing here, and I'll chat a little bit about that in a minute or so. But I think until things are integrated into a solid workflow, to the security, those security intelligence and those aspects are where the developers are working and how they want to see things. We're not gonna make that improvement. It's going to be yet another security tool that no one wants to deal with. So from our standpoint, it was really great to find JFrog and a company that actually cares about this and doing it right and having the best data. And so really excited with what we've done in such a short time. And there's a lot more that I know we're planning to do, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, and we keep mentioning JFrog Xray, and Ofer, you mentioned a good scanner that we did. I think that's much better than good, but we'll talk about that. And mostly for a lot of people, JFrog is associated with JFrog Artifactory. So I think maybe it will be a good time to speak a minute or two about JFrog Xray.
Right.
What it is and why the database was kind of the only missing piece to make it the perfect DevSecOps solution.
Right. So let's look at several examples. We won't mention everything that Xray is doing, but we've chosen several examples that we could look at. So let's look first of all about the IDE integration, where we are doing the actual shift left to the Xray. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my IntelliJ, and I'm going to add a component that I want to use in my software. It would be common file upload, and I would select a specific version that I want to use. Let's say that I'm using 1.2.2, and the IntelliJ plugin, Xray IntelliJ plugin, will immediately identify that there are problems in the component that I'm using, that I've just added. I can see the different vulnerabilities here inside IntelliJ. And in some cases, I would like to better understand them, and I'll go to look at the same piece of information inside Xray. So here is the same 1.2.2 component, and now I can look at different vulnerabilities in it. I can find in the references information that I can further dive into to understand whether there are workarounds, whether there is a way to fix that. And in the case that there is a known fix, let's say a newer version, I will also have this information both in the plugin as well as in the Xray data to be able to mitigate it as fast as possible.
So this is the shift left that we talk about.
Exactly.
Right. So you start with vulnerabilities. Not only, okay, let's check what we roll out the production. Mm-hmm. Not only, well, let's see what's going on in our CI/CD, right, but actually at the developer code, mm-hmm, when they think about introducing a new dependency, we can say, no, it has some vulnerabilities, don't do that, look for alternative, mm-hmm, research, etc.
Right.
So that's the shift left.
Yeah, the shift left as a whole is the whole movement of having people in the dev and in the ops using security data in their day-to-day work to decide whether to promote something or not. Exactly. The most shift left that there is at the level, at the phase of writing the code.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's look a little bit about how you define the policies in order to identify the violations that you want to handle as opposed to handling all of the vulnerabilities. So what we will see now, I will go into Xray, and I will choose to define a policy. I'll define a new policy. I'll give it a name because everything in life has to have a name. And I will choose the type of policy. In this case, it is a security policy. We'll talk later on about license policies. And I will add a rule. Again, we give name to everything, and I'm defining the criteria, whether it is a minimal severity or a range of CVSS scores that I want to identify. Once it is meet the criteria, a violation is created. I can define a webhook as a way to notify via Slack or Teams or something similar. I can notify via email. I can set to block downloads, and I can also fail builds, as we'll see in a minute. Blocking downloads means that I can prevent anyone from downloading a binary that has vulnerabilities that meet my criteria.
So this is a good idea, and I think a lot of solutions in our space try to do that, and they say, you know what, we will block them. And then what they will do, they will give up and look for something else. Now, from experience, both you and me, and probably Jake knows that it doesn't work that way with developers. If a developer decided that they want to use certain library because it fits their design, their architecture, and their technical solution perfectly, they will find a way bypassing both the warning in the IDE and the blocks that you set up. They will bring a thumb drive from home with this library, and they will still use it.
Right.
So this is good, but we need another layer of defense, another defense mechanisms.
Right, and it's also in the cases that I have no problem for a developer to develop something for his own usage. But when it comes to do a build, I want to make sure that something that is built and is going to be promoted from dev to test won't pass our gates. And
obviously, because if we talk about continuous delivery and continuous deployment, everything goes to production.
Right, correct. And let's see what we're doing. So here we have an example with Jenkins. We integrate with the different CI tools. I've started a pipeline saying that I want to have X-ray scan as part of this pipeline, as well as to fail the build if my policies are met and violations are created on the level that I've decided that I would block a build. So now we got to the actual phase of scanning, and in a minute we'll see whether the scan succeeded, found violations. And yes, unfortunately, there are violations. I'll go into X-ray in the dashboard because this is what I did just now. I'll see it as one of the recent violations. I click over it. Let's see, it's 251. I just want to make sure that this is the build number that we just did. Yes, it is. So now let's go and look inside these violations. So what do we have here? We have different violations. I'll check one of them. And what we can see is the recursive scan that is being done in X-ray. It identified inside the build, inside the WAR file in the build, it identified a struts in it. We'll go and see how we are identifying the effect of this vulnerability all over our system. But before that, just one thing that we've seen there, the recursive scan means that every time X-ray gets a package or a binary to scan, it will unwrap its different layers. It will look at every layer for vulnerabilities known on that layer, and it will build a graph of all of the components that comprise this binary. And we now have in X-ray a full graph of all of the components that we are using.
And this is a very important capability because in the end of the day, we verify vulnerabilities by looking at the file and saying, hey, I know that this is a struts 2, and I know that there is a vulnerability inside it. But when your scanner gets a custom file, that's something that you build, it cannot be identified in any database, even the best one, because it's the file that you just built, but you have vulnerabilities inside. If your tool is not capable of doing this recursive scanning, what you will have is a false sense of security. It will say, I didn't find any vulnerabilities. And you will say, okay, everything is great. But what happens is that inside your custom Docker layer, there is a custom Java file that inside there is, a couple of more layers. And inside you have a problem. You have this struts file. And this is exactly how Equifax happens, right?
Exactly.
So having this recursive scanning that understands as many technologies as possible is critical for you to be on control on what's actually going on.
Correct. So let's look a little bit into the impact analysis. Based on the graph that we have created, we can know at any single point where is this struts component being used. So I'll click on the struts, and I can go and see the locations, meaning the repositories in Artifactory that contain any artifact that contain them. And I can go and look at the specific artifacts that are being used. So let's choose one of the WAR files that contains these struts. And I'm seeing here a layer. It's a Docker layer, as we'll see in a minute. And the Docker is a part of a build. So I now know the full effect of using struts in my organization, and I can go and look at each one of them and decide how to mitigate. Let's look at the next example. It will be the last live example, and it is about license compliance. So same way that X-Ray can scan binaries in the recursive way to look for security vulnerabilities, we also have the legal team in the organization that tells us which type of open source components we can use from the license perspective. They define the license compliance policies, and we need to align to that.
And I think this is very important and sometimes overlooked, because while all the security disasters are in the news, right? You can I can ask you now, name me 3 huge security disasters. You will instead you will name 30. License compliance is more nuanced, more complicated, and overlooked by developers, because developers don't want to do anything with that. And for a lot of developers, the clear cut between something you can use and something you cannot use from a perspective of open source is if the source is open, right? You go to GitHub, you see the source code, great, let's put it right in production. And obviously it can bring a lot of problems, sometimes not less than security. Yeah. It compromises your company IP. It might have both legal complications immediately, but also in a very long run. If we're talking about startups, you know, the M&A can fall apart because of that.
Exactly.
And if we have a tool that treats licenses in the same way as security and just kind of abstracts your decisions as developers from this understanding the legal implications, that can be very, very useful, and X-Ray can do that.
Exactly, and it also helps you with building the bill of materials, and everyone that took part in managing software development knows that at a certain point your legal team comes and asks you, okay, what are you using inside your software, and is it allowed or not? So let's give it a fast look. So I'll go again to the policies screen, and I will define yet another policy. This time it will be a security policy. I need to give it a name, and it will be a license policy. So I've chose the license, and I will create a rule. In this case, instead of choosing a severity or a range, I'm choosing whether to look for only an allowed set of licenses or for a banned set of licenses. Let's choose GPL. What will I choose? Let's say that I'm not allowed to use GPL1 licenses anymore. So I chose that. And again, a violation will be created. I'm putting it as a high severity violation, and I can notify via Slack, email, and I can block downloads and fail builds exactly as we've seen before. I'll mention 2 additional benefits that you can have from using X-Ray, and there are more, but we won't spend the whole day on that. One of them is the ability to identify post-release vulnerabilities in what you have in your organization. So let's say that at the time of running the build, with the information that we have from VulenDB, we know that there are no vulnerabilities in my build, and I'm good to go and release that. Now, let's say that 3 weeks after that, the great guys at RBS identified a new vulnerability. Now, we need to understand how does this vulnerability affect what we already have in production. So the fact that we've created the dependency graph earlier, and the fact that we are constantly getting updates from VulenDB with any new findings that they have, gives us the ability, when we get this new vulnerability from VulenDB into your X-Ray local database, we can look at all of the places where this component is being used and notify you with the way that we've shown, and help you understand the impact analysis of this vulnerability, and for you to decide where you should mitigate it and where you should not. And the last part, because X-Ray is a part of the JFrog platform, it's yet another component, the fact that you have a single pane of glass for all of your DevSecOps activities is helping you see everything in one glance and come to the decision faster and easier.
And especially with the new announced and so on, but again, unified UI, it's even easier than before. So you go there for the artifacts, you stay for the security.
Exactly.
And getting back to those two components of a first world-class scanner and the best data, the best database we can that one can get. We spoke about a lot about the scanning process, and now let's get to Jake that will tell us how and why VulenDB is the largest and the best database, how they do it, and what's going on with that.
Sounds great. No, I appreciate that. You know, and I thought quite a bit about this, and what I wanted to do before I answer that question is sort of lay the foundation a little bit of sort of about the vulnerability management problem, and then we'll talk a little bit about how we're a little bit different about it. So to get us all on sort of the same page here, while you could sort of nitpick this, we think vulnerability management sort of has three core pieces to it, if you will, right? So that first one, which is where VulnDB plays the most, but we help on all of them, is that intelligence piece, right? It's making sure that you are aware of any of these vulnerabilities and software that you care about. Now, obviously, for most of the DevSecOps sort of world, right, a lot of developers and third-party libraries and those sorts of things, but it's also an infrastructure and COTS software, and anywhere there's software or something within your organization, making sure you're aware of the issue. That's the intelligence piece. From there, we're talking about going into prioritization. You know, there's a lot of times where people will say things about, hey, why don't I just, why do I care about vulnerability intelligence? Why don't I just, if there's a new version of a library that comes out, clearly there's got to be a security fix in there. I'll just throw that on, right? But that's a tough thing, right? Because really what you want to be able to do is prioritize what's going on with some of these vulnerabilities. This may seem odd coming from a security person, but I'm not going to tell you to fix every single vulnerability. I'm not going to tell you to fix them all at the same speed, right? I'm going to tell you to understand your assets, your environment, your applications, and then based on those vulnerabilities and those sorts of things, you can prioritize where to spend the best resources, right? Is this something that needs to be fixed immediately? Can it wait for the next release? You know, all those sorts of things need to be considered when you're talking about vulnerabilities. And then that final thing, as we can imagine, is remediation, right? Someone has to spend IT time, money, resources on sort of fixing these things. So from our standpoint, where we've been as a company and why we started this whole thing at Risk-Based Security is that we saw this problem, right? We saw a problem that the intelligence, which is the critical foundation of all of this, right? Without the intelligence, you can't do prioritization, you can't do the remediation the way you need to. We saw that there was just really bad vulnerability data, and therefore it led to companies not being aware of issues, and then in some cases, working on fixing the wrong things and not understanding where they need to focus and all those sorts of things. So that's what we set out to solve with VulnDB. Now, when we talk about the process of how things get in, I can't go any further without talking about CVE and NVD. And you know, I'm sort of tired of bashing them. I promise I am. But for those that aren't aware, CVE is a government-funded dictionary, if you will. It creates CVE IDs, and it's run by MITRE. The intent of CVE is to try to catalog a good amount of vulnerabilities. But their scope is definitely not all vulnerabilities. And I'll tell you, a lot of the stuff within the component library world is typically not covered by CVE. Now, once a CVE ID is sort of identified and it comes out and there's some information with it, it then goes from the dictionary of the ID into something called NVD, the National Vulnerability Database. It's another government-funded source. And what they try to do there is add a little bit of additional data on there so it sort of can be usable, right? Try to put some more information on there about what's affected and maybe some scoring and things like that. Now, that is what most people realize and recognize when it comes to the intelligence piece. Even so much that most security companies don't want to admit it, but that's all they use. They'll tell you, oh, we have a research team and we do all this sort of stuff. But when you drill down into the findings of their tools, et cetera, all you're seeing is that CVE and NVD is the core and really the only basis of the vulnerabilities that they're including. Why is this such a problem? Because CVE and NVD are missing over 69,000 vulnerabilities. It's, I'm not making it up. It's no joke. This is the truth. And not only that, this isn't something that's new, right? I saw some Twitter debates yesterday about this that sort of made me chuckle because it was talking about, the gap continues to grow with CVE, and a few people acted like it was new. This isn't new. This has been the case for a decade. It's going to be the case moving forward, right? 2019 numbers, we're about ready to put our big mid-year report. We're seeing the gap is there still, right? So there just is not the coverage that you would need for your applications and those components using something based solely on CV and NVD. I'm not saying throw it out. I'm not saying don't use it at all. There's good information to be had there. In some cases, the dictionary does make sense about what we're talking about. But for the most part, if you care about security, your security tooling and your DevSecOps cannot just rely on CV and NVD. Sort of goes back to what you guys were saying earlier about sort of, you run the scan and the scan comes back and says everything's fine. Well, you don't even know if the intelligence that you're using in your tool would find something. So when it comes back and says, hey, you're fine, you're not getting the confirmation that, hey, I'm monitoring these sources for you and the stuff you care about, we care about to make sure that you have it, okay? So it's really eye-opening. Now, when we typically tell people that, hey, there's all these vulnerabilities missing, no one wants to believe it, right? It really is like the first time maybe when you were a kid, if you were told that like maybe Santa Claus wasn't real, you don't want to believe it. It's just something you don't want to hear. And then if you hear it, you try to sort of rationalize some other things, right? And so for the most part, when we tell people, yes, there is a gap there, there's a sizable gap there and it matters, a couple things that they want to say. The first thing they'll say is, hey, it's probably in software that no one cares about. We don't care about it. That's not true. It's in well-known software, and from a development standpoint, tons of libraries are not getting the coverage that you need. It's quite alarming. But more than that, the next thing people will say to us is, I'm sure it can't be critical things, right? Because if it was an important vulnerability, it would have a CVID. It would be covered. And I can tell you that we did an analysis of 2018 data, and we looked at all the CVEs that were missing that were covered in VulnDB. And about 45% of them were considered high or critical severity when you think about CVSS scoring. And this was particularly in CVSS B2 scoring. So for those that are getting new to the security world, there's this thing called CVSS. There's version 2 and version 3. We actually score both, depending on what you like. Some people like 2, some people like 3. But it tries to give you some guidance on the severity of the vulnerability. Not about risk to your organization or whether you should do something, but about severity of the vulnerability itself. So, that gap that is there, it's been there. It's getting worse because more software is being published, right? The more software that's being published, the more vulnerabilities that are being found, we're not seeing it improve. Now, the sort of final thing, the nail in the coffin, if you will, for the whole CV and NVD aspect, if you or your organization or your security provider is just using CV and NVD, the stuff that they do cover, they're late. They're very far behind. Days, weeks, and months late is not unusual. And in fact, year over year, we end up seeing anywhere between 1,500 to 2,000 vulnerabilities that are published, but they're in what's called a CVE reserve status, where there's just nothing updated there, so nothing happens off of it. So in the VulnDB world, and I know I delayed, but I promise I'm answering your question now. These were the problems that we basically said, look, developers need comprehensive data, right? They need all the data about the libraries, they care about it, and they need it fast, okay? And then what they need on top of that is additional metadata to try to determine, does this really matter, right? Again, when we try to go to DevSecOps and we try to have things more sort of unified and together versus security coming over and saying, oh, this is horrible, and the developers saying, this isn't a big deal, you can't even trigger this vuln, right? Like, those arguments are painful. And so what we do is we have a hybrid organization here. We have a ton of monitoring, don't get me wrong, but anyone that tries to tell you that blockchain, AI, or ML is just going to magically solve this vuln stuff, right? That may be one day, but that's not 2 days. So we have a highly accomplished and research team that actually reviews all this stuff. So not only are we monitoring for trying to find out anytime we can find a vulnerability anywhere, and specifically in products and components that our customers care about and people are using, right? We then take it and put it into our research team to figure out what's going on, right? So what is this? Is it a really vulnerability? What's happening? And then we've got 70 plus fields of all kinds of other classifications and metadata that we try to categorize and give additional information. And so that's sort of our process. We want to make sure that we get you the best data as quick as possible, and then give you as much metadata so that you can make those best decisions. And then again, as that unified glass, that pane of glass comes together, we're talking about the same things. We're prioritizing the same things. Now, one of the cool things that we continue to try to do is not just come up with classification bits in here, but more and more insight, so you can start to make even better decisions. So if you understand sort of, hey, when a vulnerability comes out in this particular component, usually 2 months later is when we see an exploit become published, then you can start to have better conversations with when should we release, right? Look, hey, not every application can be released all the time, constantly. Maybe there's something you're dealing with that you have to schedule things, right? So, they're better conversations to have if you say, hey, look, we know there's a vulnerability in this. And not only that, typically about 2 months after a solution is published, we start to see exploits. Therefore, we want to try to get it in this release versus next year. Those are much better conversations when you bring data to the table, instead of the FUD factor of we're going to get hacked if we don't do that. So that's sort of our process. That's why VulnDB allows us to go to sort of the next level, making sure that intelligence is there through that whole DevSecOps world.
Yeah, so it's interesting how we tackled the same problem of this false sense of security from different aspects, and I think this is why the integration makes so much sense. And as in a lot of cases, 1 + 1 we want it to equal more than 2. And the value is in the combination between the two tools. Yeah,
from my standpoint, there's just so much that we've been able to do now, but there's going to be more that we can even talk about. But let's just step back for a couple things. Having all of that information in one spot, and not say us separately throwing developers data and say, hey, go figure out if you have vulnerabilities or not, right? That's huge alone. And for everyone listening, hey, when JFrog and Risk-Based Security started talking, we had to both commit to make this work, to do those mapping and matching. If you think about sort of the vulnerability intelligence world, it's traditionally been, vendor product version, and not every developer wants to see that, right? They want things to components. So, the commitment between the two to bring what we believe and our customers tell us is the best vulnerability data with the best DevOps world, and get those two working together on sort of the DevSecOps is exciting. Now, from my standpoint, we love data. We love finding more vulnerabilities, right? And so it's one of those things where as we get going more and more people begin to use it, we're going to have more sort of intelligence on what JFrog customers care about, right? And I'll tell a quick story here. It's not a myth that researchers are incented. Researchers really, right, these days only go and look for vulnerabilities when they're incented, right? It's the case. And so, we're finding over 22,000 unique vulns year over year, but there's a heck of a lot more out there. So we know we have the best database, but we would be foolish to say we've got every single vulnerability. And that may sound like we're saying, something bad about us. That's not the case, right? This is recognizing what's going on out there. And so we've, had customers that have come to us. They're just getting started on figuring out a bill of materials, right? Trying to figure out what's in their products, and then going and saying, hey, I can't find this in the VulnDB database. And the only reason that would be the case is that there hasn't been a known disclosed vulnerability at that particular time that we've been able to find some way, right? And one of the things that we're able to do is to say, great, now that we know that you care about this component or this library or whatever it may be, we're going to really dig into this. And we have this whole process we call source backfill, where we go and dig into the actual product itself and try to make sure we're monitoring and everything's going on and all those sorts of things. What I tend to find is that anywhere between 20 to 40% of some of our new clients will go out and they'll say, hey, what about this? We go and look into it, and there's vulns staring at us in the eyes, right? No one bothered to look for. No one went out and found it. Automation stuff's not going to find new fix, right? You got to really dig in and do that work. So I think from my standpoint, I love the fact that we're bringing it together. I think that's the most powerful thing. But I think as more usage and we start to really roll this thing out, every customer is going to benefit from us digging in and finding more vulns, and then not just dumping more work on them and saying, you were already overloaded and having problems fixing these vulnerabilities anyways. Here's a whole bunch more. No, that's not it. It's giving it to you in a way so you can prioritize it, fix the stuff that matters. And I think it's super exciting.
Yeah, and it's about providing more to the customers, right?
Correct.
That's the essence of this integration.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah, so what we see as the value of this integration.
yeah, so Jake said it almost all. So it is the combination, the synergy between the products that really gives you the ability to understand where are you vulnerable and where you're not, and what's the effect of a vulnerability if you're using this component. And we have been asked, okay, so how can I get it? And if there is an X-ray customer in the audience, you already get it. You don't need to do anything. Without even telling you, we've injected VulnDB data into your X-ray, and you just get it because you're connected to our centralized vulnerabilities database of X-ray in JFrog's cloud. And so your local X-ray gets updated each time with VulnDB inside. Someone asked me, why don't you have a sticker of the VulnDB or RBS on your laptop? It's because it's VulnDB inside. You don't need to know that it is there, but it is there.
But we would love to get some stickers. Jay,
Yeah.
Can you make sure we get some stickers?
Oh, I'm going to make sure stickers are slapped all over your laptop when you're not looking.
That sounds a good plan.
Right.
As our time is running out, I would like to maybe jump to some conclusions now, so we will have some time to take some
Yeah.
questions. So just to summarize, the best practices on more of an actionable stuff that we want you to walk away with. We spoke about the unknown of the unknowns, and we spoke about how dangerous not paying attention to that and feel this false sense of security. My builds are green, everything is great, how important that is. Mm-hmm. So I would say that's the first part. Bring more information, both about the vulnerabilities out there and about what your software is about. This is where the integration comes in. You have a best scanner, you have the best database, you have less unknowns. Mm-hmm. Shifting left and breaking the silos, bringing security into the conversation of DevOps, and making sure that security is not some afterthought. Oh yeah, we also need check for security, but actually is baked as other aspects, as being able to push to production, as guaranteeing the quality, but also making sure that you don't have any security or compliance issues that will bite you later down the road, and doing it as soon as possible. And if we could inject it to developers' mind, so they will wake up in the morning with knowing what vulnerabilities exist in any packages, that will be the ultimate shift left. Mm-hmm. But I think the closest to that in the reality that we live in is actually doing it as their type, the next dependency they want to use and alert them there. And this is also something that X-Ray with VolnDB allows. So those are the three main concepts, I would say. And with that, we will take a look at what we have in Q&A. I think we have a lot of questions, and we will be more than happy to take some of that. So, yep.
So maybe one of the questions that I'm seeing, and just to make sure if it's not clear, someone is asking, how much does it cost? So if you're an X-Ray customer, it comes for free. You may also get a sticker, but it's simply our commitment to provide you the best vulnerabilities database that there is.
And there are some interesting questions, for example, feature-wise, like which IDEs do we support?
So we support at the moment the main three ones: IntelliJ, Eclipse, and Visual Studio. Soon to come, what we see a lot of customers using today, VS Code. And we are open. This is, in most cases, this is an open source that we share with you, and we are working on satisfying your needs.
They're all open source plugins for you. Another interesting one, and I will take this example to just speak a little bit about the broader concept, is is X-Ray integration available for Circle CI? And you can always say replace Circle CI with any CI server. Is it available for Drone.io? Is it available for Travis? Is it available for CodeShip? The answer for all of them is you actually can use this kind of integration with any CI server. Mm-hmm. And this is thanks to the JFrog CLI, JFrog command line interface, that allows you to bake those security checks and get the results, and then decide to fail your build from within the build script, from within one of the steps, and then you can do it from each and every one of them. There are some with the built-in integration. And Jenkins can be one example. Yeah. JFrog Pipelines, the CI/CD solution, which is part of JFrog now, obviously will be the simplest to integrate, but you can do it with any one of them just by using JFrog CLI. Yeah, and we have another question for Jake. Yeah, this one. So people say that NVD can be frustratingly slow. Presumably you have the same timeline. How can we get the data faster?
Yeah, so from our standpoint, again, the fact that NVD is so slow is one of the big value props of VolnDB and the integration. We don't wait for NVD to publish data, right? So when a vulnerability comes out and we find it, we do everything we need to. We get it out super fast to everyone. And then NVD may be days, weeks, months later, and that's great. And if there's additional data there, awesome, right? We can look at that as well. But that's one of the reasons that we do all this our own work. We score everything with CVSS v2, v3 for the people that want to have that question to help them with prioritization. So yeah, so you will not have that frustration. And I think that's one of the key things, when data is delayed and you get it maybe so much later, you're already behind the curve on attackers and what you need to do. And then they get more pressure versus if you get it up ahead of time, they can give you some time to plan, prioritize, to figure out what's going on. So without a doubt, if you're using X-Ray with the VolnDB stuff in it, which you should be, you'll see things coming a heck of a lot faster than you're used to.
Right. I see an interesting question. Instead of failing a build with Jenkins plugin, can I have a report file generated containing the vulnerabilities as part of the internal release notes process? For sure. It is your decision which kind of vulnerabilities will fail your build or will prevent downloads and which not. There are customers that do not want to fail or prevent anything. We give you the full control. You want to ask this one?
Yeah, and I think we are maybe the last one, because
Yeah.
we're kind of past of time. So and again, Jake, this one is for you. You have more vulnerabilities in RBS. The problem sometimes NVD has vulnerabilities, but there is not enough data of knowing what we can do. Is your data better in this regard?
So it's a great question, and I think JFrog knows we're direct and honest when it comes to everything. We are a vulnerability intelligence organization. So there are times when a vulnerability comes out and there's not a clear or easy known upgrade or a fix or whatever it may be. We hope that isn't the case, and our team does everything as possible to try to give you that additional information so you can understand if there is a solution or what you can do, or are there other mitigating controls, right? And so some of this is, again, in that intelligence phase. There may be some other things that, as developers working with security, and again, this whole DevSecOps thing, there may be some things that can be done where, yeah, maybe the code isn't solved the way we want to, but we have some other compensating controls in there that now it can't be triggered, or it couldn't get to this, or, things of that nature. So there's a possibility, but I will tell you, we do extra research trying to give as much actionable information as possible.
Yep. So thank you very much, Jake. I think with that we're kind of out of time. So let's just go again through a little bit of householding items. So as I mentioned, the webinar recording is coming. You see the Twitter handles and the hashtags. Talk to us. And just to remind you, JFrog.Xray and RiskBasedSecurity.com, those are the two resources that you want to visit to learn more. With that, thank you very much for coming. Don't forget that we have a question of what would you like to see next in the survey. So if you didn't get to it now, will be a good time. And with that, thank you very much, and see you in our next webinars.